In the heart of a snow-covered forest, a teenage girl follows mysterious footprints that vanish into thin air. What begins as a quiet winter getaway turns into a chilling descent into an ancient woodland with secrets older than time itself. Emily uncovers her family's hidden connection to a living, breathing forest that never forgets and never lets go. Each step leads deeper into the unknown, where memory, truth, and fate are all tangled in roots beneath the snow. Once you enter the forest, you don't come back the same. This isn't just a ghost story, it's a haunting legacy. What if the forest could remember you? Emily thought she was just spending a quiet winter break at her grandmother's remote cabin. No internet, no distractions, just the cold beauty of the snow-covered woods. But everything changed the morning she discovered a single trail of barefoot footprints in the snow, leading deep into the forest with no return. Her curiosity becomes a key to something far older and far more alive than she could have ever imagined. As she follows the trail, she finds herself pulled into a hidden world where trees whisper forgotten truths. Time bends like branches, and the forest itself holds memories of the past. She discovers that her family isn't just connected to the woods. They're a part of it, a part of something ancient, something watching, something waiting. This atmospheric story will pull you in slowly, layer by layer, like mist curling through the trees. With deep emotion, eerie twists, and an unforgettable reveal, Creepy Winter Woods Stories isn't just a tale of survival. It's a haunting journey of inheritance, sacrifice, and becoming one with the forest itself. You'll question what's real, what's remembered, and what it truly means to be chosen. Emily pressed her forehead against the cold window pane, her breath fogging the glass as she stared into the forest. The trees stood tall and unmoving, like ancient sentinels in the fading light. Snow drifted softly to the ground, covering the world in silence. It was beautiful in a haunting kind of way, like a painting that hid something terrible just outside the frame. She had arrived at the cabin 3 days ago. Her grandmother had met her at the door with a warm smile, woolen mittens, and a pot of spiced tea already on the stove. The scent of cinnamon and pine had wrapped around Emily like a blanket, and for a moment she had truly believed this trip would be peaceful. The cabin sat alone at the edge of the forest, miles from the nearest neighbor, carved from dark timber, and surrounded by snow-covered trees that grew too close to the house. Closer, Emily swore, than they had the day before. It was the kind of place that made you feel like you were being watched, even when you were alone. Especially when you were alone. Inside it was warm and cozy, filled with old books, faded photographs, and the low crackle of the fireplace. There was no television, no internet. Only the wind, the snow, and the whisper of branches tapping the windows at night. Emily's grandmother, Margot, was a quiet woman with kind eyes and a voice like rustling leaves. She moved slowly, wrapped in thick sweaters and knitted scarves, and spoke in riddles that made more sense the less you tried to understand them. Winter. Here isn't like the city, Margot had told her on the first night. It's older, wilder. You have to respect it. Emily had smiled politely. She was 16, smart, grounded, and firmly rooted in reality. She believed in science, not stories, but something about the way her grandmother spoke made her stomach twist. That night, as the wind howled through the trees and the fire dimmed to a low orange glow, Margot had said something else, something that stuck with Emily. The woods remember things, you know. Not everything stays buried beneath the snow. Emily had laughed nervously. What kind of things? Her grandmother just stirred her tea and said, "You'll know when it's time." Now, standing by the window, Emily watched the snow pile, higher along the forest's edge. The sunlight was almost gone, and the trees had begun to blur into shadows. She hugged her sweater tighter around her shoulders and turned away. She wanted to feel at home here, to enjoy the stillness and unplug from the chaos of her everyday life. But something about the cabin unsettled her. It wasn't just the creaks in the floorboards or the way the wind seemed to sigh through the walls. It was the feeling that the forest was alive, not just filled with life, but aware. Earlier that afternoon she had gone outside to gather firewood. The air had been crisp, the sky pale blue, and the snow so clean it looked untouched. But then she'd seen them. Footprints in the snow. Large, wide, and deep, like someone had been walking barefoot through the cold. They led from the tree line to the back of the cabin and then disappeared. No return prints, no signs of struggle, just a single trail. Emily had followed them for a few feet, her boots crunching behind the stranger's steps. But the deeper she went, the more wrong it felt. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the trees were holding their breath. She turned back before reaching the forest, telling herself it was probably just a trick of the light. Maybe melted animal tracks. Maybe her own imagination. But something inside her whispered that wasn't true. Now, she stood in the small kitchen, staring at the fireplace, as it flickered shadows across the walls. Her grandmother sat in her armchair knitting slowly, eyes half closed. "Did you go outside today, Grandma?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margot didn't look up. "Just to check the porch. Why?" Emily hesitated. "I saw footprints, big ones, bare feet." Her grandmother's hands froze mid-knit. A long silence passed before she said, "Sometimes the forest walks closer to the house." "What does that mean?" Margot looked at her, eyes sharp and suddenly much older. "It means don't go into the woods unless you're ready to see what they've hidden." Emily's mouth went dry. "Have you seen them before?" Another pause. Then quietly, "Once." The fire crackled louder. Emily's heart beat in her ears. Her grandmother didn't say anything else. She just resumed knitting, the needles clicking softly in the heavy silence. That night, Emily barely slept. She lay in bed, listening to the wind, to the scratching of bare branches on glass. She told herself it was just an old woman's superstition, just winter playing tricks on her. But deep down, something told her the footprints were only the beginning, and whatever had left them wasn't gone. The next morning, the world was drowned in white. Thick snow had fallen overnight, layering the landscape like a heavy, muffling blanket. The sky was a pale sheet of gray, casting a strange, muted glow over the forest. Everything looked untouched, undisturbed, except for one thing. The footprints were still there. Emily stood on the back porch, coat zipped to her chin, gloves trembling around a steaming mug of tea. Her breath curled in the air, short and quick. She hadn't expected the prints to remain, not after so much snowfall, but they hadn't faded. In fact, they looked clearer than before. Too clear. Each one was bare, wide-toed, deeply pressed into. The snow, like the walker, had been impossibly heavy, or impossibly real. They began just at the tree line and continued in a perfect line toward the cabin. And, just like yesterday, they stopped. No turning back. No drag marks. No melting. Nothing. Emily squinted at the trail, scanning the trees. The woods beyond stood, still, draped in silence. The branches sagged beneath the weight of the snow. Nothing moved, no birds, no squirrels, just that heavy, unnatural hush, like the whole forest was holding its breath again. She heard the door creak behind her. "Emily," her grandmother called softly. "Come inside. It's not safe out there." Emily didn't answer right away. Something was gnawing at her. Curiosity, yes, but something else too. A pull, as if the forest had a string tied around her, tugging gently. "I'll be quick," she said, stepping off the porch before Margot could argue. The snow reached halfway up her boots, cold and thick, but the footprints were easy to follow. She stepped directly into the first one, feeling a strange thrill chase up her spine. It was still warm. That shouldn't be possible. Her pulse quickened. One by one, she followed the trail into the woods, her boots crunching softly behind her. The air grew colder with every step, not the sharp cold of winter, but a deep, creeping chill that settled into her bones. The trees closed in around her. What had seemed like a short walk stretched longer and longer, the prints weaving through a narrowing path. The trunks rose taller, here their bark rough and dark, like old scars. A fine mist curled between them, clinging to her clothes and hair. 5 minutes passed. 10. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. No signal. She stopped. The prints suddenly changed direction, curving left toward a denser part of the woods where the snow grew deeper and the trees closer together. Emily hesitated. Something about this area felt wrong. The air here was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like a sound waiting to happen. Then the prints ended, just like that. The final one sat at the base of a crooked birch tree, half covered in frost as if whoever, or whatever, made it had vanished into the air. Emily turned in a slow circle. Nothing but trees. And then the humming began. Faint, barely audible like a lullaby drifting on the wind. It didn't come from a single direction. It seemed to come from everywhere, echoing off the trunks and swirling through the branches. She froze. The tune was familiar, gentle, old-fashioned, like something from a music box. She followed it. There was no logic in it, just instinct. The song seemed to weave its way through the forest, and Emily moved as if in a dream, brushing past branches that reached for her like bony fingers. Then she saw it, a clearing, and in its center, a tree. It wasn't like the others. This one was massive, easily twice the width of any surrounding it, its bark a silvery black that shimmered faintly beneath the snow, its branches curled upward, frozen mid-twist, like it had been caught in a slow-motion storm. At its base, the snow had melted in a perfect circle, and that low humming, that haunting lullaby, was coming from within it. Emily stepped closer. Symbols were carved into the trunk. Not initials or dates like kids might scratch in summer, but deep, ancient grooves. Spirals, eyes, circles inside circles. Her fingers twitched. She reached out. The bark was warm. Her glove steamed where it touched. The humming stopped. Behind her, a voice whispered, not loud, not cruel, but close, like breath on her neck. "You shouldn't be here." Emily spun around. No one. But now, something else had changed. A second set of footprints had appeared in the snow, leading directly toward her. Large, bare, fresh. They hadn't been there a second ago. Her breath caught. Her heart slammed in her chest. She looked back at the tree. A crack had begun to split down its trunk, and from within, something glowed. The crack in the tree widened with a groan, deep and low, like the sound of ice breaking on a frozen lake. Emily stumbled back. Snow, crunching beneath her boots, but her eyes stayed locked on the strange, shimmering light bleeding through the bark. It wasn't a harsh light. It pulsed softly like a heartbeat, like it was alive. She swallowed hard, every instinct screaming for her to run, but her feet didn't move. The forest around her had gone still again, but it was different this time. Not just quiet, expectant, as if everything was waiting to see what she would do next. She took a cautious step forward. The tree's bark continued to peel apart in slow, deliberate movements, revealing a hollow chamber within. The light came from something deeper inside, flickering like candlelight behind a veil of mist. It wasn't warm or cold, not threatening or welcoming. It simply was. The humming began again. Soft, melodic, familiar. Emily blinked. Her mind tugged at the melody, trying to place it. Then it hit her. A lullaby. One her mother used to hum when Emily was very little, back before she passed away. A song Emily had forgotten until this moment. How could the forest know that? She stepped closer, to the tree, drawn to the sound like a moth to a flame. Her breath fogged the air. Her fingers tingled as she reached out again. The moment her palm touched the inside of the tree, the humming stopped, and the world changed. The snowy clearing vanished. The cold disappeared. Suddenly, Emily stood in a tunnel of roots and bark, the walls curving above her like the inside of a great beast. The floor beneath her boots was solid wood, polished smooth by time. Faint lights danced along the ceiling like fireflies, blinking in and out of existence. The air was still, but not dead. It felt aware, like the tunnel itself was watching her. She turned back. The entrance was gone. The hollow tree had sealed behind her, shutting her in complete silence. Emily fought the rising panic in her chest. She clenched her fists and whispered, "Okay. It's just a dream. A dream or a hallucination. Maybe I fell, hit my head." But everything felt too real. The rough texture of the walls, the earthy scent, the echo of her own heartbeat in the tight space. With no other choice, she walked. The tunnel stretched far longer than the size of the tree should allow. It twisted slowly, the walls narrowing and widening in turns, like the breathing of something deep and old. Along the walls, more carvings appeared, symbols like those on the tree's trunk. Spirals, eyes, geometric patterns that seemed to rearrange themselves when she wasn't looking directly at them. The humming returned. This time it came from ahead, growing clearer with each step. She rounded a bend and found a chamber. It was circular, made entirely of roots twisted together like a woven nest. In the center stood a pedestal made of stone, rough and ancient, and resting on it was a wooden box. Small, ornate, unlocked. Next to the box, leaning against the pedestal, was a photograph. Emily's stomach dropped. It was her, standing outside the cabin, bundled in her coat, holding firewood. The photo was glossy, crisp, recent, taken that morning. She stared at it, her mind trying to untangle what she was seeing. No one had taken that photo. Not her, not her grandmother, and yet, there it was, proof that someone, or something, had been watching her. Her eyes drifted to the box. It looked hand-carved, with a delicate vine pattern around the edges. With trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a pocket watch. Gold, tarnished, still ticking, tick-tick, tick-tick, tick. The humming stopped again, and then a voice spoke. Not aloud, but within her. A whisper not made of words, but of thoughts. "You have seen the path. You cannot unsee it." Emily gasped and dropped the watch. It hit the floor with a soft thud, but didn't break. It simply lay there, ticking, as if nothing could stop its steady rhythm. The voice returned. "You are the third. "Who are you?" she whispered, scanning the chamber. "Where are you?" There was no reply, just the ticking, and then images, flashing in her mind like memories not her own. A girl, her age, walking through the snow years ago, reaching this same chamber, holding the same watch. Then darkness. Another image, a woman, familiar, young but with eyes that held centuries, standing in the clearing, entering the tree. Her mother. Emily staggered back, eyes wide. Her voice shook. My mom. She was here? She chose to forget. The answer dropped like a stone in her chest. Emily looked down at the watch, suddenly, understanding. It wasn't just a timepiece. It was a key, a test, a choice. And now it was hers. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Emily stood frozen, the echo of the voice still ringing somewhere deep in her chest, like a bell struck in a distant cathedral. Her eyes locked on the pocket watch lying at her feet, ticking steadily in the stillness. She chose to forget. The words clung to her skin like frost. She bent down and picked up the watch. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been, and warm to the touch. The ticking was louder now, as if it echoed inside her bones. When she closed her fingers around it, she expected another vision, but none came. Instead, the chamber around her began to tremble. At first, it was subtle, a low vibration beneath her feet, like something enormous shifting far below the earth. Then the roots lining the walls began to retract, pulling away, revealing slivers of blinding white light. The sound of wind rushed in like a breath held too long, and in a blink, she was standing back in the clearing. Snowflakes drifted lazily. From the sky, the tree was gone. No hollow trunk, no symbols, no light, nothing but a smooth layer of untouched snow, as if the ancient tree had never existed at all. Emily spun around, heart racing. Everything was the same as before. Same trees, same sky, same icy air. But it felt different, like the forest was aware of her now, like it was waiting. Then she saw them. New footprints. They started at the edge of the clearing and led directly toward her. Large, bare, unmistakably human. Emily backed up, her boot slipping slightly in the snow, heart hammering in her chest. Her eyes searched the tree line, scanning between branches for movement, breath catching in her throat. And then she saw him. A figure, tall and still standing at the edge of the trees. He wore a long coat, tattered at the hem, the color of ash and winter smoke. His face was hidden beneath a deep hood, shadows swallowing his features. But even without seeing his eyes, she could feel them on her. Ancient, unblinking, and focused. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, one hand at his side, the other raised slowly, deliberately, pointing at the spot where the tree had been. Emily's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely, louder than the wind. The figure didn't answer. Instead, he took a single step forward, not threatening, not fast, just one step. Emily stepped back instinctively, her boot sinking deeper into the snow. The forest felt tighter now, the trees closing, in like ribs around a heart. The silence was too thick. Even the birds, who had been absent all morning, hadn't returned. And then something stranger happened. As the figure approached, the snow beneath his feet didn't crunch. It didn't compress. It didn't shift. He was walking on top of it. Emily's mind scrambled for explanations. Optical illusion, adrenaline, shock, but none made sense. She turned to run, the watch clenched in her fist, But before she could move, the stranger spoke. Not with his mouth, with his presence. "You carry it. Now." The voice rippled through her like a ripple in still water. Not heard, but felt. A weight that pressed against her skull, against her ribs. She took a breath. "What is it?" The stranger stepped closer. Still no face. Still no sound. Just that. Voice, invading her thoughts like a dream she couldn't wake from. Memory. Time. Truth. You carry the forest's burden. Emily wanted to scream, to shout, to drop the watch and run. But part of her didn't want to run. Part of her, deep, buried and ancient, understood. "This is why my mom came here," she said slowly. "This is what she saw." The figure lowered his hand. She turned away. You stepped forward. A sudden gust of wind rushed through the trees, sending a swirl of snow into the air. Emily raised her arm to shield her eyes, and when she looked again, the figure was gone. Not a sound, not a print, just empty space. But in that space, where the snow swirled and settled, something else had appeared, a shape beneath the snow. She stepped closer and brushed the powder away. It was a stone marker, half buried in ice. Carved into it was a single name, Margot, her grandmother. Emily staggered backward. No date, no words, just the name. The wind howled once, sharp and sudden. She turned and ran. Boots slamming through snowdrifts, lungs burning with cold. Back toward the cabin. Back toward the truth she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Emily burst through the cabin door, breathless and wild-eyed, snow falling from her shoulders as she slammed it shut behind her. Her chest heaved with cold air and fear, and the pocket watch in her hand ticked louder than ever, steady and deliberate, like the beat of a second heart. The cabin was dim, the fire in the hearth reduced to glowing embers. Shadows stretched, long across the floorboards. Everything was still. Too still. "Grandma?" she called, her voice cracking. "Are you here?" No answer. She moved through the cabin quickly, checking each room. Her grandmother's knitting lay half-finished on the armchair. Her slippers sat neatly beside the fireplace. The kettle on the stove was still warm, but Margot was gone. Emily stood in the center of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself, the silence pressing in like a physical weight. The photograph from the chamber still burned in her memory. Herself, caught in a moment no one should have seen. And now the stone in the forest, with her grandmother's name carved into it like a headstone, old and waiting. She turned the pocket watch over in her hand. It ticked steadily, hands circling without end. But there was no time marked on the face, no numbers, just a single, small symbol etched into the center of the glass. A circle enclosing an eye, the same symbol that had been carved into the tree. The same one now faintly visible beneath the skin of her own wrist. An imprint she hadn't noticed before. Not a tattoo, not a bruise. It was under her skin, glowing faintly with the same pale light that had spilled from the hollow tree. She pressed her fingers to it. The ticking grew louder, her vision blurred, and the cabin began to change. Not violently, not suddenly, but as if a curtain was being drawn back from reality itself. The wooden walls seemed to pulse, swelling like lungs. The windows darkened. The fire flared and then extinguished itself with a hiss, throwing the room into shadows. And in the corner, where there had once been only a wall, there was now a door. Emily had never seen it before. It didn't match the rest of the cabin. Its frame was narrow, made of gnarled black wood that twisted like vines. The doorknob was smooth and white. Bone, she thought. Or ivory. She stepped toward it, watch in hand. As her fingers touched the handle, the door creaked open on its own. Beyond it, there were no walls, just roots, thick and endless, spiraling downward in a tunnel of bark and soil like a staircase carved into the earth's heart. The same tunnel she had walked before, but now it felt older, more aware. The air smelled of earth and rot and something else. Memory. The watch ticked once, tick, and she stepped through. The door closed behind her without a sound. The tunnel narrowed, then widened, then narrowed again. Time meant nothing here. Emily moved by instinct, guided by the pulsing mark on her wrist and the steady ticking in her hand. Then, at last, she emerged. The chamber at the end of the path was not the same as before. It was larger now, vast, cavernous, the walls lined with carvings and symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. A massive tree root twisted through the ceiling like a skeletal limb. In the center of the room stood a second pedestal. Stone, cracked, ancient, but this time, something else was there. A mirror. Tall, framed in blackened bark. Its surface shimmered like water. Emily approached it slowly, heart hammering. She stared into the glass and saw herself. But not just herself. Reflected back at her was a version of Emily slightly different. Older, her hair longer, her eyes sharper, more knowing. And behind this other Emily, the room was full of people. Women. Dozens of them. All with familiar faces. Some known, some only seen in photographs. Her mother, her grandmother, and others. Generations of women, each with a mark on their wrist, each holding a golden pocket watch. They looked at her with quiet sorrow and warning. The mirror began to ripple. The reflection of the other Emily stepped forward and placed her hand on the glass. So did Emily. Their palms met, and the mirror shattered. A scream tore through her mind. Not a sound, but a sensation. Sharp and cold and full of grief. The chamber erupted with wind, symbols flaring bright, roots thrashing above her head like serpents. Then, silence. Everything stilled. The chamber was empty once more. Emily knelt, clutching the watch. The mirror was gone. The pedestal stood alone. But on the stone, burned into its surface, were 5 words. You were always the key. Emily rose slowly, her breath coming in short, unsteady gasps. The watch in her hand had stopped ticking, but the mark on her wrist pulsed like a heartbeat. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was part of it. The memory. The forest. The secret. Her family had passed down through generations. Not in words, but in silence. In stories buried beneath snow. In lullabies and old warnings. In eyes that had seen too much. She turned and walked back through the tunnel. The roots made way for her, and somewhere above, the forest waited. The tunnel did not return her the way she came. Emily stepped forward into darkness, and with each movement the air changed. Warmer, damper, thicker. The root-lined corridor grew narrower, then wider again. Curling like a spiral, the sounds of the surface world swallowed completely. Only the faint rustle of unseen leaves remained, as if the forest's lungs were quietly breathing all around. Her. She kept her hand clenched around the pocket watch, though it no longer ticked. The silence of it disturbed her more than its once constant rhythm. It felt like holding a dead heart, still warm, still shaped by life, but undeniably silent. As she walked, her fingers brushed the tunnel walls. They pulsed faintly beneath her. Touch, as though blood or memory still flowed through them. The bark felt less like wood and more like flesh. Every knot, every groove seemed to respond to her presence, and then the voice came again, not in her ears, not in the air, inside her. You have gone too far to forget. Emily stopped, her breath catching. The voice was colder than before. It held depth, age, but no malice. Just inevitability. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I am the keeper, the forest's memory, the one who watches." Her throat tightened. "What do you want from me?" The tunnel ahead lit slowly, not with fire or electricity, but with soft bioluminescent light that seemed to bleed from the very roots. It glowed along the walls like veins awakening. "You stepped into a path shaped long before your birth." Emily moved forward slowly, the glow guiding her. "This isn't just about me, is it?" "No. But you are the next to remember. And memory is the first step toward truth." She emerged into another chamber, vast and oval, the ceiling hidden in shifting vines. In its center stood a towering figure formed entirely of twisted roots and moss, its face shaped like a mask with no eyes. It stood still, arms outstretched, like a crucifix woven by the forest itself, but its voice echoed directly from it. "Your family has always been close to the root." Emily stepped toward it cautiously. "My grandmother, my mother, they were here too." Yes, Margot chose to leave her mark and forget. Your mother tried to outrun hers, but none can escape what they carry. Emily's voice cracked. "She died afraid. I saw it in her eyes. She never told me what haunted her." The figure tilted slightly. The vines twisted slowly down its arms like living threads. "Because she remembered just enough to fear the truth, but not enough to understand it." Emily's fists clenched. "Then tell me, no more riddles, no more dreams. What is the truth?" A long silence. Then the keeper moved. Not forward, not back, but inward, as if folding into itself. The vines unspooled and revealed something beneath. A massive wooden table. Circular, carved with maps, not of cities or countries, but forests. Spirals of green and white and gold, endless and shifting. One map glowed softly. Emily recognized the shape of the trees, the bend of the river, the outline of the cabin. Her forest. "These woods are older than time as you know it," the keeper said. "They do not belong to man. They remember every step, every death, every lie buried beneath the snow. The forest forgets nothing." Emily stared at the glowing map. Her fingers brushed the place where the cabin sat. The glow beneath her fingertip pulsed faintly, as if acknowledging her. "But why my family?" she asked. "Why me?" "Because your blood carries memory like a vessel. Your line was chosen to keep balance, to hold the forest's secrets. But the balance has shifted. Others have entered without asking. They have taken." Images flashed through her mind. Clear-cut logging fields, hunters, campers carving trees, tourists lighting fires. And now the forest begins to forget itself. You must help it remember. Emily took a slow step back, her heart pounding. How? By becoming its voice. The chamber dimmed. A wind stirred that came from nowhere, and with it came whispers, 1,000 of them, layered and ancient in languages she didn't know but somehow understood. They were memories, of people lost, of things buried, of truths silenced, some painful, some full of wonder, all of them real. Her head ached, but she didn't look away. The forest wasn't just a place, it was a living memory. And it had chosen her. "You want me to be the next keeper," she said quietly. The vines on the figure rustled in agreement. "You already are. But to stay, you must give something in return." "What?" "The part of you that doubts." Emily's breath caught. "You must remember fully, without fear, without escape, and if you do, the forest will live through you." She stepped to the table, the map glowing beneath her hand, and the roots began to rise, slowly, tenderly, wrapping around her arms, like vines reclaiming a tree. The pocket watch flickered back to life in her palm. Tick, tick, tick. Only now. It kept her rhythm. The roots held her gently, not like bindings, but like the embrace of something old and understanding. Emily stood, motionless at the center of the glowing chamber, her hand resting on the map that pulsed with the heartbeat of the forest. Around her, the walls shimmered with memory, flashes of moments long past, playing like faded film on the bark and stone. A child's laughter lost in the wind, boots crunching through snow. A song, soft and low, drifting through the trees like smoke. The forest was alive with ghosts, but none were malevolent. They weren't here to scare her. They were waiting, watching, whispering. The forest does not choose lightly. The keeper's voice filled the chamber again, but it sounded different now, closer, more human, less like thunder, more like a whisper passed down through generations. Emily turned slowly. Where the vine-wrapped figure once stood, a new shape had formed. Tall, still draped in moss and bark, but with a silhouette more like a person. No face, only a faint glow where eyes should be. It raised a hand, and with it, a shape emerged from the floor, another mirror, smaller than before. This one was clear. Emily stepped toward it, her reflection slowly coming into view. Her hair was dusted with snow, her cheeks flushed from cold and fear. But her eyes looked older than they should. They held the weight of knowledge she hadn't asked for, and a power she hadn't known she carried. Beneath her sleeve, the mark on her wrist pulsed faintly. The forest's brand. "You said I have to give something," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "Something I won't get back." The keeper didn't answer with words. Instead, the chamber filled with a soft hum, like wind through pine needles. The answer was felt. "You must give your certainty, your fear of the unknown, your need to explain the unexplainable. And in return, you will remember everything." Emily's breath trembled. "But what if I don't want to stay?" Another flicker of warmth. The forest did not command, it offered. Two paths unfolded in her mind. One was the path back. She saw herself walking through the woods, emerging from the snow, dazed and cold, but alive. She would tell herself it had all been a dream, an elaborate, terrifying hallucination brought on by the solitude of winter. Her grandmother would remain missing. The forest would go silent again, and life would move forward. But something inside her would always feel incomplete. That ticking echo would never stop. The second path led deeper. She saw herself woven into the roots of the woods, not consumed, but connected, a part of something older, something greater than one life. She would hold the forest's memories, guard its truths, speak in the silent voice of snow and soil. She would become what her mother feared, what her grandmother whispered of. A keeper, her, lips parted as she stared into the mirror, her fingers brushing its edge. The watch in her palm ticked once more, then stopped again, waiting. The forest held its breath. Emily closed her eyes and made her choice. She opened them slowly, and the mirror had vanished. The map had faded. The glowing chamber dimmed to a soft dusk. But the forest sang, not in words, not in voices, but in presence. It welcomed her. The roots unraveled from her arms and retreated, not with finality, but reverence. Emily stood taller now. Her fear had quieted, replaced by something stronger. Not certainty, but understanding. She turned and began, walking, not back through the tunnel, but into a new passage, one she hadn't seen before. The trees above parted as she stepped into the open air, snow gently falling around her. But this snow felt different. Not cold, not heavy. Living. She walked through the woods slowly, boots leaving a new trail behind her. Steady, confident, chosen. The forest watched her go, and it was pleased. The forest was no longer silent. As Emily stepped through the snow-draped woods, the trees whispered softly overhead, not with wind, but with recognition. They swayed as she passed, not from any breeze, but as if bowing to her presence. The hush in the air wasn't the stillness of isolation anymore. It was reverence, a quiet that watched. She walked with slow, deliberate steps, her boots leaving faint impressions in the snow. The cold didn't bite as it had before. It was still, present, still real, but it felt aware of her now, as though the frost knew not to touch her the way it once did. The path back to the cabin seemed to open naturally, revealing itself where before there had been tangled brush and maze-like undergrowth. The trees no longer concealed the trail. They guided it, their trunks creating a natural corridor that led her home. But home no longer felt like it once had. When the cabin came into view, Emily stopped. The house looked the same. Weathered wood, sloped roof, icicles hanging from the eaves, but the air around it felt charged. Like a storm was humming beneath the surface, waiting for her to cross the threshold. She stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned under her feet. The door, left ajar, creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was untouched. The fire had burned low but still glowed, barely more than embers. Her grandmother's knitting sat where it had been. The tea kettle still hung over the stove. But Margot was still gone. Emily walked through each room slowly, methodically, taking in every detail with new eyes. The furniture looked older now, not in age but in weight, as though it, too, held memory. The paintings on the walls, landscapes of trees, rivers, and cloudy skies, seemed subtly changed, their details sharper. The birch tree outside the kitchen window was no longer just a birch tree. It was watching her. She paused in front of the mirror in the hallway, the one she had passed 100 times during her stay without thinking. Now, she stared into it, with quiet curiosity. Her reflection stared back, but something had shifted. Her eyes were the same color, the same shape, but deeper, as if her pupils had swallowed more than just light, as if they remembered things she hadn't yet spoken aloud. The mark beneath her skin, just under the wrist, was still there, clearer now, a faint circle enclosing an eye, glowing soft gold beneath the surface, as though it had always been a part of her. She reached up and touched her face. It felt like hers, but different, more hers than it had ever been. Her gaze drifted to the floor, and froze. A trail of footprints, small, bare, leading from the hallway toward the back door. They were wet, as if someone had just stepped inside from the snow. She crouched beside them, touching the nearest one. Still warm. And then she noticed something else. On the wall, just above the floorboards, carved into the wood in careful strokes, symbols. like the ones on the tree. Spirals. Eyes. Lines crisscrossed like woven thread. They hadn't been there before. Her heart beat faster. Not in fear, but in realization. The forest hadn't just marked her, it had followed her home. A rustling came from behind her. She turned sharply, but there was no one there, only the coat rack by the front door. But one coat was missing. Her grandmother's. Emily moved through the house like a shadow, every breath shallow, every step deliberate. She checked the bedrooms. Nothing. Then, the cellar. Empty. She returned to the living room where the fire had all but gone out. And that's when she saw it on the mantel, a folded slip of paper. She opened it slowly, hands trembling. Inside, a single sentence written in her grandmother's handwriting. Some roots run too deep to pull free. Beneath it, a mark, the same spiral within a circle that now lived under Emily's skin. Her knees weakened and she sat down on the edge of the old armchair, staring at the paper, feeling its weight despite how light it was. Her grandmother hadn't left. She had returned to the forest, to itself. Emily understood now. The keepers weren't lost. They were woven in, their bodies forgotten by the world, but their memories alive in the trees, in the roots, in the cold wind that whispered forgotten names. And now, so was she. The pocket watch pulsed faintly in her coat pocket, not ticking, not chiming, just existing, like an organ without a body. She looked toward the woods again, the sky outside growing darker. The first true snowfall had begun, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of a new season, a new chapter, a new keeper. The snowfall was different now, not frantic, not soft. It came down in slow, deliberate flakes, each one drifting like ash from some ancient fire. Emily stood in the doorway of the cabin, the final note from her grandmother still clutched in her hand, and watched the white world shift around her like a dream she couldn't wake from. The forest didn't frighten her anymore. It knew her. She, in turn, had come to know it. Not in full, not yet, but deeply enough to understand that everything it had shown her had a purpose. Every whisper, every shadow, every pulse of the mark beneath her skin. It had been a calling, a preparation. And now, something was about to end, or begin. She stepped onto the porch. The snow sighed under her weight. Her breath fogged the cold air, but it no longer felt biting. The woods were silent again, not empty, but waiting, holding their breath. And then she saw them. Footprints, fresh, clear as ink on paper. Only this time they did not lead into the woods. They led away from the cabin, beginning at the very steps where she stood, curving gently toward the tree line. The prints were small, bare, delicate, feminine. Her grandmother's. Emily followed them without hesitation, snow crunching beneath her boots. The wind didn't blow. The trees did not groan. The forest was still, as if honoring the moment, as if acknowledging the path she now walked. The footprints wound gently through the woods, leading not to the hollow tree, not to the mirror chamber, but to a different place. One she hadn't seen before. A grove, perfectly circular, framed by old oaks and black pines. The snow here was untouched except for the single path of prints leading to its center, and there, standing quietly in the middle of the clearing, was Margot. Emily stopped. Her grandmother was facing away, her gray hair loose, her woolen shawl dusted in frost. She looked impossibly still, like part of the forest, like she had always been there, just out of reach. "Grandma," Emily whispered. Margot didn't turn. But her voice came, carried not by her mouth but by the trees themselves, rustling through the branches, vibrating through the roots. You followed farther than I ever dared. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" Margot turned slowly. Her face was kind, as it had always been, but behind her eyes now lived something more. A depth, a stillness, a knowing. "I did," she said softly. "You just hadn't learned to listen yet." Emily stepped into the grove, her boots brushing through the untouched snow. "I thought you were gone." "I am," Margot replied with a sad smile, "and I'm not. The forest keeps what it loves." Emily's voice trembled. "Are you real?" Margot stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Emily's cheek. "What is real, child? The trees, the stories, the things you see when your eyes are closed?" "I don't know anymore. That means you're ready." The wind returned just faintly, circling the grove like a breath let out too slowly. Emily reached for her grandmother's hand, but it was already fading, not into nothingness, but into everything. Margot's skin dissolved into mist, into snow, into the bark of the trees around them. Her shawl fluttered once, then fell to the ground, landing softly in the snow. The footprints behind her melted into the earth. Emily dropped to her knees, clutching the shawl. But she didn't cry. Instead, she looked around the grove and saw them. Dozens of faint shapes. Women, standing among the trees. Some old, some young. Some just silhouettes, all bearing the same mark, the same quiet strength. They were not ghosts. They were not illusions. They were keepers. Watching, waiting, and Emily, kneeling in the snow, heart full of aching and awe, understood. She was not the last. She was only the next. She stood slowly, the pocket watch in her hand glowing faintly once more. The grove pulsed softly, and the snow began to fall again. Warmer now, lighter. The forest was alive, and it would remember, because she would make sure it did. Winter lingered longer than usual that year. The snow, once harsh and biting, had turned, gentle, falling like a hush over the land, blanketing everything in a fragile stillness. The sky remained a pale sheet of silver, and the trees no longer stood as strangers in the dark. They were familiar now. They breathed with her. Emily stood at the edge of the grove, where bark met open sky, the mark on her wrist pulsing faintly beneath the cuff of her sleeve. The wind stirred around her softly, pulling at her hair, carrying the scent of earth and ash and pine. She had not spoken in hours, but her silence was not emptiness. It was reverence. It had been days, or perhaps weeks. Time flowed differently now. Less linear, less urgent. She didn't measure the passage of days anymore with clocks or calendars. The forest was her measure now, and it had taught her how to wait. Each morning, she rose before the sun, lit a fire, and walked the paths between the trees. She listened to the whispers in the wind. Sometimes they were voices, half-remembered songs, laughter from unseen mouths, warnings in languages long forgotten. Sometimes they were memories that weren't hers at all. A young girl running barefoot through birch leaves. A mother lighting a lantern on a winter's night. A hand gripping a pocket watch during the last breath of fall. She did not fear them. They came to her now as threads in a much larger weave. The forest gave them to her. Its stories, its secrets, its scars. And she held them with care. One morning, she woke to find the grove changed again. Where there had been snow, moss now bloomed beneath the trees. Small violet flowers peeked through the frost. blooms she'd never seen in any book or catalog. Their petals opened slowly toward the gray light above, swaying in rhythm with a wind she couldn't feel on her skin. In the center of the grove stood a new tree. It was young, barely taller than her shoulders, but already it pulsed with a glow beneath the bark. A soft, golden light, like the ember of something ancient and freshly kindled. Its leaves were pale silver, translucent at the edges, and they whispered when no wind blew. Emily approached it in silence. As she laid her palm against its trunk, she understood. It had grown from memory, her decision, her choice. And now it would grow in the forest forever. A reminder, a beacon, the first of many. She spent the rest of the day near the tree, speaking aloud, not to it, but to those she once feared had vanished. Her grandmother, her mother, the women whose footsteps she'd followed unknowingly her entire life. They hadn't disappeared. They had returned. They had become woven in. She watched the snow fall again that night, and for the first time, she felt the forest breathing with her. It no longer watched her from the shadows. It walked with her, within her. It would guide her now, just as it had guided those before. But Emily knew something else, too. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only her chapter. Because the forest didn't end. It waited. It waited for the next footstep to fall, the next question to be asked, the next soul brave or broken enough to listen. And when that day came, the forest would remember, because Emily would still be there. Among the roots, in the wind, in the trees that leaned just a little closer than they should, watching, whispering, waiting. If you're into immersive horror, eerie, slow-burn suspense, or stories that make you question reality, don't scroll away. Grab your headphones, turn off the lights, and hit play. Let the forest take you, and when it ends, ask yourself, would you have followed the footprints